Thank you for coming. I'm going to be quick now because my colleague has done a bit longer than she should have, but I'm not criticizing her, so I might be incomprehensible, but that's because life is unfair. So, is this actually showing the whole thing rather than like, that's weird. Shouldn't it show just the slides? Look at that. So much better. Okay. I want to talk about how to make the web better, because I don't work on the intelligent edge. I just work on the edge, which is the browser in Microsoft. And I've been working in the web for 20 years. I've been working at Yahoo. I've been working at Mozilla. I've been working on Firefox, Firefox OS, all the things that people didn't use. And I've seen the web grow from something that people use to something that people just have and don't even understand any longer. So what is the purpose of a browser? What does a browser really have to do? When I started my career, those were three things. Render web content, table layouts and things like that, forms. Show multimedia content, so you were actually happy when the JPEG showed up for the first time because the connectivity wasn't that fast. And follow and inspire web standards, because we didn't have web standards when I started. I had to suffer the things of Internet Explorer 4, 5, and 6, and then we had standards to work against, which was much, much better for our lives, but actually harder for people to understand because they already written it against a standard that didn't exist. This is what the web looked like. This is kind of what web surfing was, and I really don't know what happened to that guy's foot, but fair enough. But this is what we were all excited about, surfing the web. Where was the thing, you said that in a pub, and people were like, what do you mean? They had no idea what it was. That's when we just had headsets, the first Bluetooth headsets in your phone. Like, oh, look what I got. Nowadays, we're actually talking about a completely different web. It's a changed, ubiquitous web. The web is everywhere, on IoT devices, on desktops, on laptops, on tablets, and on mobile phones. It's actually like water. People don't care about it any longer. People don't know what to do when they're offline. They just don't expect to be offline any longer. We open the tap and water comes out. We just want the water to be clean, but we don't want to know about the plumbing. The same way our end users don't want to know how your website was built. They don't want to know what kind of technology you used. So the job of a browser itself changed drastically. We're not only there to develop, to show content, we're there to show web and multimedia content fast and reliably. And believe me, people upload the most random things and complain that the browser is bad. When I worked in Firefox, every single time we had a release, I had some person emailing me that it's still a terrible browser because it cannot render the images that he has to work with. Then I asked him, what images are you working with? And he said 300,000 by 260,000 pixels. And I'm like, why would you ever open this in a browser? What do you think, like zooming in 6,000 times till you see something? That makes no sense, but people put all kind of stuff on the web and they expect us to render it fast. It has give access to the web regardless of ability. Blind users, people who can't see, people who can't hear, people who can't use their hands properly, people who just basically can just nod or suck on a straw, they also have the right to be on the web and to have things on the web available to them. Keep users safe by blocking unsafe content and patch attack vectors. The bad people of the web are actually much better at embracing newer technologies than the good people of the web. Every time there's a new web standard, you find an abuse of it faster than use in the wild. And remember users' history and access credentials, or remember nothing. I love that I don't have to type in my address and my name every single time I go to a new website because the browser remembers it for me. I also like using Firefox Focus, which is a throwaway browsing instance that doesn't record anything of mine, and I can completely delete it from my device once I'm done. Allow for detailed customization, including extensibility. Extensions in browsers were the big success of all the new browsers right now. They're also the biggest attack vector for performance problems and security problems. And sync content across a range of devices. I don't want to surf on my mobile phone and then go to a desktop and have to remember all these URLs again. I just want to sync them again. This does not only mean that we as browser makers have to think about all these things, but it also means that every developer has to understand what the web has become, that it's become this main information portal for people out there. And we have audiences with different needs for a browser. We have to think about the consumers of the web. We have to think about creators of web content, web developers themselves, extension developers, app developers, and IT departments. And they all have different needs. And probably each of you work in one of those instances, or maybe you're just something else. But you will sooner or later use a browser and do some web content. So web developers need to know a lot. They need to know about performance. How does this thing render really quickly? Accessibility, how it's available to everybody. Interoperability, does it work across devices and browsers? Security, is there a massive hole in there that allows people to run their Bitcoin miner in the background? Maintainability, how easy is it for the next person to take your code and run with it and do something with it? And to a lesser degree, browser quirks, because they're kind of going away. They're not as bad as they used to be. Developer tool chains, whatever you want to actually subscribe to. The browser developer tools, abstractions, the command line interface, and editors. These are all things that a common web developer nowadays needs to know, not like, what is the color code for background blue? And we're troubled by that. We actually enjoy a lot of privilege. We love being what we are, but we actually feel a lot of pressure. We're in high demand. A lot of people say like the web is the thing, or apps are the thing, and apps to me are the same as the web, because in essence, a lot of them are overlapping these days. But people who want us to hire, have no idea what we do. We just expect to come with knowledge and apply it immediately in any environment. We're better off than ever in terms of tooling, technology, and standard support, but we feel that someone out there is there to eat our lunch. This anger that I always see, like, you got to do this or people are going to download an app. You got to do this or people are going to do VR. Nobody needs the web anymore. This new technology will replace it. And it's been replacing it for 20 years. I'm getting tired of that argument. Why do we get so stressed about what might be when we could just celebrate what we're having right now and concentrate on making good things for people? There's a thing called JavaScript fatigue. It's the inability to keep up with the latest tools and the fear of becoming obsolete and the constant change of the ecosystem and the overwhelming choice. You look at something at Hacker News, people talk about 10 things you don't know, and you feel like, oh my God, should I go into goat herding? Or should I get rid of my job because I'm obviously falling behind? And then, of course, it says tools can fix that. We've got best practice setups, boilerplates, build tools with automated optimization, replacing JavaScript with a DOM, debugging tools and generators. All these things can teach you the things that you don't know while you're using them. Which leads to another thing called full stack anxiety. We have so many problems right now, it's amazing. There are more tools and plugins developed to help the site creation than there has ever been before. And for graduates coming from university right now, starting out with these helpful tools and plugins are a double-edged sword. Job applications rapidly cite these technologies as prerequisites for winning a position. Needs to have 5-year experience in a half-year-old library. Or needs to know this in and out and that in and out. So instead of asking for a Java developer, instead of asking for a JavaScript developer, we ask for a React developer, for an Angular developer, for a Vue.js developer, and you don't even have time to think about these things any longer. And as a result, we see a full stack anxiety. Things are advancing too quickly, and the amount of learning required for a fresh graduate is completely overwhelming, which cracked me up when I read this, because graduate? It's the same for me. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I feel like I have no idea what people are talking about anymore. I love this tweet. I have no idea what I'm doing. Just use Poofberry. What is that? It's like Fuzznuts, but for hooks up. And then it integrates with LogBungler. And these kind of answers you get, like, use that one, but you need to install it with that framework first, and on that setup, and this thing. And I'm like, I just wanted to change the background color of an image. How do I do that? Well, we need these 12 things in there. What people are looking for are T people. People basically know one thing really, really well, but could be implemented in all the others. So you need to know all the things, but you need to be an expert in one. And how do you actually have time for doing that? Even worse, other companies are looking for W people. So you need to do 2 things really, really well and deep, and then you actually have a foundation in the others, but you still have to understand everything. But what I see most when companies, especially startups, look for people, what they want is actually the A to Z people, full stack developers. You need to know everything and you need to do everything. It's like this mythical being that can optimize your database and keep it secure and at the same time know CSS in and out. I love this. I use this chameleon in there. Can you imagine the first chameleon be found by humans? The other chameleons would be like, what the hell have you been doing? You know, they're supposed to camouflage, they're supposed not to show up, but people found them sooner or later. So full stack developers are supposed to know everything without your company having to give you time to learn it. You do that in your free time. You have to be young and independent so you can enjoy the overtime, or you have to put in to reach arbitrary deadlines. And you have years of experience, especially applying brand new technologies. I've seen these things requested, and people, I just had a company in San Francisco offer me a job for half the salary that I have right now, but I also have to pay my move over there and find a flat in San Francisco to get the job. And I'm just saying there like, what? I'm a German citizen, I can't even work in America. Haven't you looked at that first before you just throw out that to me? And all in all, the state of software and the web isn't surprising, and it's terrible. When a lot of people are starting about a coming software apocalypse because we've been writing code for years and years, hoping that nobody finds out that we didn't have enough time to write it properly. And we're relying on these things. I see massive errors in banking systems, in electrical grid systems, basically software we're relying on. But why is that? Especially, why is it on the web? Why are most websites depressing to look at and really, really annoying, and show me more auto-playing videos and pop-ups and asking to fill out surveys before I actually go there to read the article? We don't lack resources. We have great platforms. Browsers are excellent. Operating systems are getting better as well. We don't have the issue anymore that mobile operating systems have a browser built in that cannot get upgraded, for example. We have great information. We've got the Mozilla developer docs, caniuse.com. We've got great tools. The developer tools in browsers give us insights. We've got highly customizable editors, and we got collaboration suites. GitHub is wonderful. Isn't it great that basically I cannot make mistakes on my own code any longer? I don't have to save it as like final.html, final really this time HTML, final this time I mean it.html, and put it in different folders with different dates. Everything I do is retained, and I can go back when I mess up. I can ask people to collaborate with me. I can talk to people about it. It's wonderful. Abstractions, we've got React, we've got Vue, you've got Angular. If you don't want to think about it, they should give you good results as well. And we've got hands-on training, video courses, training courses on GitHub, workshops at conferences. You could just sit on YouTube all day and learn lots of coding and interactive coding environments to do your job. Why is it that still what we have out there is most of the time horrible? It's because they're learning obstacles. Resources with upvoting options favor the how over the why. That's why Stack Overflow and these kind of things is basically the easiest solution that says just copy this in and don't think about it, will get most upvotes because it solved the problem of the person that went there. They did not want to understand what the code does, they just wanted to know how it works. And a lot of times these solutions work right now, and in half a year's time they're actually a bad idea in terms of performance, in terms of security, in terms of support for browsers. We're not paid to learn, we're paid to deliver. Especially in the startup market where it's like, you gotta churn out code, you gotta churn out code. You don't get time to actually learn things. Why didn't you learn that before? Because I'm 17. Doesn't matter. You really should have learned that before you started the job here. Peer pressure makes developers who don't know things afraid to admit it. That's why I hate as a speaker asking like, who knows this? And everybody's hand will go up, because you don't want to be known as the person that actually uses old technology or has to work with a mainframe or likes Internet Explorer. You don't want to be that person in a crowd that is hostile towards you. There's always a good enough way to create a lot in a short amount of time. Just use this boilerplate, and you want to have this one button look like that, put these 300 lines of CSS in there, and it's going to be fine. To a degree, the web has been set up for that, because we need to be forgiving. It's not a software platform, it's also a medium. It's there for people to publish things in. And that's why anyone is allowed to write code for the web or use whatever they want to create that code. The person using GeoCities or AngelFire or a website generator or Dreamweaver 10 years ago still has the right for their content to be rendered correctly on the web. Although I would love not to have to deal with that stuff any longer, but this is what the web is about. Whatever goes wrong, it's always the browser's fault, no matter what you people do wrong. It's like, as I said, the guy with the 200,000, 400,000 pixel image, like, oh, your browser should be able to do that. Like, how would it even do that? Doesn't matter, you should do it. Users shouldn't suffer from developer errors. We are actually there to deliver something to people. As a web developer, I'm there to somebody to build interfaces that makes people's lives easier and allows them to do tasks easier than they would do in real life. buying things online, getting an insurance, finding a placement for their kid in a kindergarten, all kind of things. And legacy products will never get fixed. That's another problem. And you can't break the web. Whatever we do, we cannot break the web. We cannot make things faster, securer, easier, because people want old things to still be there. And it created a mess. The web has become a render target amongst many others. When I started, we knew our stuff. We knew how browsers worked. We didn't know how browsers worked. Nowadays, we know much more the insights of what a browser does, but we know what to do to make it work across browsers. And releasing often and developer convenience trumps semantics and performance of the final product. How fast you get it out of the door is much more important than if your end users have to wait 3-4 seconds for the first page to render, because we don't measure that as much as we should. And websites are slow and huge because we work on fast computers and good connections. I work remote at home. I work from cafes. I work from random places, hotels, airports. And that way I realized just how bad some of my products behave because I don't have the fast connection in the office where I play with things. Dylan Beattie, which some of you might know from NDC Oslo, he always speaks there, so tweeted that the other day, like, you create a React app and then you go into the folder and do a clock, and it actually has 1.5 million lines of code generated for you before you start your first line of code of the product that you want to build. He also says it's contributed by volunteers and enthusiasts, no formal review or release process. And this is normal in modern web development. I don't know what he wanted to say with that, if it's just that's crazy that it's normal, or actually how cool is it that that many people contributed to it. But we should be worried about this no formal review or release process of these things. We should be worried about using random third-party code without knowing what it does, just because it gives us a convenient starting point. This is not bashing React. That's the same in every one of these libraries. We rely far too much on other people's code and hope it works. An analysis of the HTTP archive realized that 27% of websites are 90 to 99% third-party content. Meaning people used random things that they npm packaged or back in the days downloaded, copied and pasted from Stack Overflow, and built their websites with that. They don't understand what that code does. They don't know the impact of what it has to their end users. They don't know if they have to download 5 megabytes of JavaScript just to have a whistling unicorn or something like that. And basic things get forgotten. Basic things about computing. The other day, I wrote a little demo thing, and I had this CSS in there, where I have a banner that is positioned absolute, and pointer event none, so you can actually click on it and click on a link behind it, and a nice transition to show that it actually moves smoothly around the screen. And then I have a span in there where I put my text in, and the text is white on a black background, and it actually shows a label that moves around with the thing. Now, I didn't want to show and hide that every single time. So in CSS, there's an empty selector. So if something is empty, if an element is empty, just don't display it. I don't need to have any logic in my JavaScript, in my backend or something to hide this. CSS does this thing for me. And of course, the first thing I get back from somebody, if var is empty, then the p will not be empty. And basically, it will display it. What's the mistake here? White space is content. A line break is also not empty. And when you started or when you use VI, or when you started in the back in the days, you realize that this makes sense. If I want to have a P with a white space in it, I want to be able to style that as well. So just because we use a variable in there, the rules of HTML haven't changed. Even better, when we talk about online, especially on Twitter, about technology, we get very, very excited about the wrong things. This was a wonderful thing the other day. To increment some counter on the page, note inner text plus equals 1 doesn't work, because then it's 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1. But note inner text minus 1 works fine to 0, 1, and 2. And of course, this leads to everybody going crazy about JavaScript being terrible again, and actually being, oh my God, what's going on here? So I love the explanation is, of course, that there's coercion going on. JavaScript is a super forgiving language because it was written in 10 days. And other languages are as forgiving. So what we're doing here is actually we're taking a string and we're subtracting a number from it. which makes no sense. It's like have a toaster and a duck and try to actually make them mate and make something out of it. These are two different things. But JavaScript is like, you know what, you probably meant that this is a number, I'm turning it into a number for you, and when you subtract something from it, it turns into a number again. If it's a string and you add a number to it, it actually says, you obviously want to add that to the string, that's why we got the 5-1 thing going on here. And I love the discussion that ended up with that, where somebody said, like, there's strong typing, there's weak typing, and there's whatever the hell this is. And somebody defined it as passive-aggressive typing. And I kind of think that, like, you know, it's like I can really think the JavaScript engine sitting there like, you know, you obviously don't know what you're doing. You know what? I help you along no matter what. I'm going to do something for you. But what really struck me as somebody who works in the browser and works in security and loves to mess with your web products was actually the first premise, what that person was doing here with that counter. This is terrible. I'm actually taking the text of a node inside the browser and just add something to it and make that a counter. I trust something that is on display in the browser. You know what I have? I've got developer tools that allow me to change that number to whatever I want. So that way, I can always overwrite your counter. If it's a counter that goes down from 10 to 0, for example, I will never get to the 0 and use your game until the end of the world. There was a travel website, for example, an airline that had their air miles as a global JavaScript variable. They didn't scope it, so basically it was a global JavaScript variable. So whenever I booked a ticket, I just went to my developer tools, gave myself 12 million air miles, and got upgrades to first class for free. Don't trust anything that's in the interface ever. I mean, this is inner text, that's okay. Inner HTML will be even worse, because then I could inject JavaScript and do all kind of XSS fun and read out your cookies and write things to your local storage and install my, my browser. But instead of complaining about this abuse of the web or this overly trusting the interface and mixing interface, display, and business logic, we complained about JavaScript doing random things when you put strings and numbers together. But let's go one level higher. Things that matter and you should know is not about different JavaScript engines or libraries or if you use Vue.js or Node.js or Poofberry or Fuzzberry. Performance is one of the main things that a web product should do well. People are there to get to your content. People are there to get to do the thing that they came for. Render as fast as possible. Give people information that things are being loaded in the background, chunk your downloads, load things only when they're necessary and not up front. It's a very, very important part. You lose most of your users because they have to wait. Accessibility is another important thing. It's not up to you to say who can use your websites. I had a nice quote the other day at an accessibility meetup we had in the office in Berlin, where it's basically saying, like, if you don't care about making your interfaces accessible to different needs of different disabilities, and if even dyslexia, hard of hearing, people like that, it's like having a door in your office, and every fifth person coming in says, like, I don't want your business, go away. You don't do that in real life, but you do it on a website if you're just too lazy to put an alternative text on an image, or if you're too lazy to give a description for an animation, and these kind of things. PWA readiness, progressive web apps are the big thing that actually changes the market quite heavily right now. On-demand application technology using a URL as the distribution model. Development environment, know your editors, know your setups, know how to be much more effective in developing things than you were before, because we have these open editors that you can contribute to. Interoperability, it has to work on all devices, it has to work on all the browsers. It doesn't have to work on all of them the same. It's totally fine to give an Internet Explorer 6 user an empty field that they type something in with a label next to it. Don't give them beautiful interfaces, it confuses them. They're not used to them, they're used to IE6 interfaces. And security. If somebody loses their data because of you, because you were too lazy to, or you trusted some HTML, then you're to blame. There's just no way around it. And there are great tools and services for this. There's Xcore for accessibility testing, there's SNCC for security testing, there's SSL Scanner for doing your SSL checking of your setup of your server, there's in-browser developer tools with auditing and Lighthouse, now at WebDev as well since the last Google I/O. And there's webhint.io, which for an all-in-one solution. And I'm going to talk a bit about this, and I'm going to be at the booth all day today and tomorrow as well, if you want to have some demos of that. Now, if you haven't seen the audits yet, the audits tab in Chrome, that's actually pretty cool. You can actually say, I want to simulate a mobile device. I actually want to test for performance, progressive web app readiness, best practices, accessibility, and SEO. And I want a simulated connection. I want to have it throttled. I don't want to have the fast connection, the reliable connection that I'm working with here. And then I want to clear the storage to make sure that nothing that I served before gives us a better performance thing. And these are the kind of reports you get from it. You get like a little timeline to see how the page rendered, and you see how much you made in the different things. You got 12% in the performance, 15% progressive web app, 100% SEO, 67% best practices. The problem with that, though, is like, what does that mean? And does it apply to my product? This tool makes things easy, no need to look it up. Sure, but trusting magic is something that's not a good idea. Huge Carb app uses this configuration and toolchain. If it works for their needs, it should rock for you too. You know, if Facebook uses that, then probably your one-page marketing site should use the same JavaScript framework, right? Not really. And using this configuration optimizes for the modern web is my most hated sentence, because the modern web is nothing. The modern web used to be Flash. The modern web used to be frame sets. The modern web used to be, oh, I can play background music when you come to my website, which people still do, sadly enough. And there's too many rules and barriers for developers as well. Opinionated tools like that demand you to fix things that don't apply to your product. This website of this event does not necessarily need to be PWA ready. You don't want to install it on your machine, although they probably want you to. Dependencies and complex toolchains can be daunting. Like, okay, here's the 50 things you have to change in your server to make sure it's actually performing well. I can't even access my server. I don't know what's going on here. And best practices often don't get updates and are contextual. What was a best practice 20 years ago, 15 years ago, might be a terrible idea now, but back then it was necessary. And having to follow strict rules without understanding them is not fun. That's what my whole life is about. I never wanted to follow rules without being explained why I do them. So what is a best practice? It's considered a best practice is dependent on the goal of what you want to achieve. Sometimes it's just rolling out a thing with a boilerplate and deleting it 10 days later. That was the best practice for that product. The problem is that the business goals of the product don't necessarily mesh with our goals as developers. People want it out of the door as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible. We want to think about what the impact of it is. We want to make sure it's secure. We want to make sure we don't have to go back to it and work on it again. We just want to have it out of the door and somebody else can maintain it. Even worse, often what is defined as a best practice years ago isn't quite as important to new developers. They don't care if it actually works in Internet Explorer 6 because they've never seen it. Lucky bastards. And often we only learn the value once we messed up. So when we teach people by giving them the perfect solution, just use this and look how pretty it is, we're actually robbing them of the last bit. It hurts doing things wrong. And it's good sometimes to do things wrong. When I interview people, I make mistakes deliberately because I want you to argue with me. I want you to be the developer that says, like, well, that's not right. Instead of like, yeah, sure, I want to have that job. That's great. You know, I want you to question things. I want you to make mistakes, but not on the expense of our end users. So we got to make our best practices in context customizable. So having information isn't enough when people don't go there. The Mozilla Web Docs are a great resource, but if nobody goes there or has no time to look it up and instead goes to Stack Overflow to find a copy and paste solution, we have a problem. We need to prevent mistakes before they happen, and we need to allow people to customize experiences. An intranet site, for example, needs a different setup, a testing setup, a performance setup, and a security setup than a website in the wild. On the intranet, you don't have to be that scared of like injection because it would be people from the company doing it. So let's target editors and build processes instead. Instead of having great things where people can go online where they don't go, How about we actually make our editors and our release processes have these best practices as part of them? The first thing is actually linting and inline insights in editors, and people who've been using Visual Studio know that for years, but people who, like me, came from TextMate and HomeSite and was on Mac for the last 8 years before I started at Microsoft, I didn't even know that these auto-completion things make sense. But ever since I started Visual Studio Code, and I get my CSS tested and planned, and it tells me down there what I'm doing wrong while I'm writing the code, I've become a better developer. Why would we allow people to make mistakes and then have to learn the debugging step when we could just tell them while they're typing it that this is probably a bad idea? So going one further, webhint.io is a product that actually puts all these together. It uses the other tools that I talked before inside an own interface. So when I now, for example, it's open and it's customizable, you can create your own tests, and it's community-driven. So this is not a Microsoft product. It's a Microsoft product written by us, but other contributors as well, and given to the JS Foundation, so it can survive whatever happens to us, which is good. And I love that. I love open sourcing things. So this is, for example, the Techdays.fi website that I ran through it. And it found quite some bugs in security. It actually, 6 of 7, it passed. That was nice in compatibility. PWA, it had 1 problem. Performance, it had 138 problems, which is something that we can fix. And pitfalls, none of them. Security, 144 errors as well. And a lot of these things are very simple things to fix. But you just didn't know them. You just don't have time to analyze that and go with it. Now, if you want to put that in a build process, that's even better. So a web interface or a browser developer tools are great to test your things, but it doesn't scale to production because you need some tester or somebody to do that by hand. So why not add the best practices as part of your build and deployment process? That way you can test the setup of your bundler and preprocessor to avoid huge release sizes. If you use something like TypeScript and you actually want only support newer browsers and you put all that code in that will never get executed, that's a bad idea. So you do that with an npm module, so you just do npm or npx hint and with the URL, and that way you get the result on the command line. And you can do that there's an API to that, so you can call that API and put it back in your build script. If there's hints that actually fail, if there's errors that fail, don't publish that thing, send it back to your queue and let it being built again by your developers. You can customize the tests to your needs. So once you know what your product needs are, you can turn different tests on and off. So if you have an intranet site, the PWA stuff doesn't make any sense to you. You're just in your JSON configuration of your hint test, you say, don't test that PWA stuff, I don't need this. You can write your own tests. So for example, make sure that every footer has a picture of a leprechaun in it, just as an example, could be easily written by you. And there is an interface for that with a wizard. So you do npm create hint rc, and then it asks you, is this a test for this? Is a test for that? What do you expect? What should come out of it? Much like any other unit testing framework out there. If we go even further, you can have a code extension that runs webhint in the background. Because the cool thing is that code has a browser in it as well, so we can and Node in it, so we can do these things. So what that one allows you to do is, say, for example, in your manifest file, you run over and it says like the web manifest should have invalid value, blah 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 for background color. Fix that first. So you get those squiggly lines under it, much like you get in Word when you're doing something wrong, while you're writing it. Not after you deployed it, not after the baby's out of bathwater, and not after you actually have to debug it. The same way you can do with your browser configuration, in this case using your Webpack configuration. You actually say you only want to support modern browsers, but you want to generate ES3 code, which is much more code than you need, so set that up differently, and then it even tells you how much megabytes you saved by generating it that way instead of just doing it like it did before. And accessibility, images should have an alternative text. This one doesn't have an alternative text. What's going on there? Can you just fix that? And isn't it cool to get these squiggly lines and get rid of them and then send it off to GitHub? That's much, much easier than actually debugging and getting reports and having to answer people's stuff. So in summary, I think we accumulate a lot of knowledge over the years what software should do for users and how to make sure it does. The problem is we suck at making sure that busy and new developers learn about it. We have all the knowledge, but we make the same mistakes over and over again because we're too busy building things randomly and getting them out the door. So we know, however, that people are happy to use editors, open editors like Atom, Visual Studio Code, other open source editing environments like CodePen, like JSBin, like StackBlitz, all these kind of things where I can code these days. So instead of whining that people don't follow our best practices, let's make them part of the build process. Let's put these things in so people cannot make mistakes, and the editor teaches them good practices while they're actually coding, and not just like, here's how it works, hopefully it works for you, or actually 2 months later, please change it. We're past the stage where developers have the chance to learn the trade before applying it, because we got a massive lack of engineering talent. We need more people than we actually have, so we actually get people in and brute force them into our environments rather than teaching something first. Our editors are much more than dumb text writing tools and not as overwhelming as huge IDEs. I'm not too excited about using Visual Studio, I admit that. I'm a web developer. I like a simple editor, and that's why Visual Studio Code is my weapon of choice at the moment. And if I would do what Visual Studio Code can do, I would still be there. We tend to build products using a toolchain we customize to the need of the product. So if you build this in your company, if you optimize your company by having your own toolchain, put some of these tools in there that test the quality of it and tell people when something is wrong, and not just throw it over to a third-party QA company to do that for you. So both these editors and the tool chains are an opportunity to instill a sense of ownership to developers and learn about our mistakes before our users suffer from them. So if the editor teaches me good practices while I'm using it, I don't feel dumb, and I don't feel that I'm missing out because I don't need to spend extra time. I learn while I'm working, not in my free time, so I can actually do my job, which sadly enough is the case a lot of times nowadays. And that's all I had, so thank you very much.